Shalom Aleichem, welcome. I'm Lisa Newman, the Yiddish Book Center's Director of Public Programs and Publishing, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to tonight's, in some places, and this afternoon's program, Vanished Streets, Unseen Photographs of Jewish London with Rachel Lichtenstein, which is being presented virtually from here in London. Today's program is co-sponsored with the London-based Jewish Renaissance magazine, and very excited that the program will include an afterword with the magazine's director and publisher, Aviva Dautch. Before we get started, just a few reminders. Your video and your audio will be off throughout the program. You may send us your questions via the Q&A panel, usually located at the bottom right of your screen. We ask that you keep questions short and refrain from comments so we can try to answer all of the questions today. I'm delighted to introduce this evening's program presenter, Rachel Lichtenstein, a British artist, writer, and curator who's internationally known for her books, multimedia projects, and artworks that examine place, memory, and Jewish identity. She has curated and written a catalog about Shloimy Alman's work. Rachel has been instrumental in bringing the exhibit Vanished Streets to the Yiddish Book Center in Amherst, Massachusetts, and has also written for the magazine Pakenträger, the Yiddish Book Center's member magazine, an article about Stenzel. Aviva Dautch is an arts journalist and director and publisher of Jewish Renaissance, a quarterly Jewish arts magazine. She has lectured on modern Jewish culture at the University of Roehampton, the London School of Jewish Studies, and JW3. Welcome, Rachel. I'm going to lead off with Rachel presenting the program about this evening's photography of Shloimy Alman, and it, as I mentioned, will be followed by Aviva joining us on screen.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and I'm going to turn the screen over to you.
Lovely. Well, I'm here tonight to talk about Shloimy Alman and his wonderful photographs of the Jewish East End. I first heard about Shloimy when I was working at Sandys Row Synagogue in Spitalfields in the East End of London, London's oldest still functioning Ashkenazi synagogue. And the president of the synagogue there, Harvey Rifkind, was a great friend of Shloimy Alman's. And it was Harvey who first told me, knowing my interests in the Jewish East End, about this unique collection of images from the 1970s of a world that has now largely disappeared. And at that time, Shloimy was living in Israel on a moshav in Kfar Daniel with his wife Linda, where he'd been living with his family from the late 1970s. And he told Harvey about these slides, and Harvey had seen some of them, but not all of them. Anyway, he persuaded me that they were important enough for us to investigate further. So in 2019, I went to Israel to meet Shloimy and Linda, and I spent 10 days on the Moshav scanning these incredible collection of over 300 color slides. Shloimy would not let these slides leave his side. And during the 10 days that I spent with them there, he told me more about his life and how he came to photograph the former Jewish East End of London. Next slide, please. Shloimy Alman was born in Manchester in 1950, 3 years after his Polish Jewish parents arrived in England in 1947. His father, Moishe Alman, was from Tarlov, a small town with a sizable Jewish population situated halfway between Krakow and Warsaw. Tragically, Moshe's first wife and child were killed during the Holocaust. He spent the war years in a Siberian labor camp working as a lumberjack, and he survived. After the war, Moishe was instrumental in starting the first Yiddish school for surviving Jewish children in Warbrich, which is where he met his second wife, Sarah, Shloimy's mother, and her daughter, Eva, then age 6, also Holocaust survivors. Next slide, please. In 1947, Sarah and Moishe married and they left Poland for Manchester as Moishe had two brothers living there, Laser and Faisal, who'd settled in the city before the First World War. Laser had several barber shops in the Strangeways area of Manchester. And when Shloimy's parents and Eva first arrived from Poland, they lived there as refugees. Shloimy told me that they slept in the attic and that there was another room on the first floor which contained Laser's library of Yiddish books. Laser, he said, was a working man with no formal education, but he was tremendously well read and he had an amazing collection of books and he was very involved in Yiddish literary circles in the UK. And when the Yiddish theatre came to play in Manchester, all the actors would be put up in the barber's chairs to sleep overnight. And in the morning, Laser would serve them the most magnificent breakfast. He was a very generous host. Next slide, please. Here's a picture of Shloimy as a young child, and these are the streets in Manchester where he grew up. Aside from the connection with Laser and the occasional Yiddish theatre troupe that would visit, his parents really craved the vibrant Yiddish culture of Poland, which was largely missing in post-war Manchester, although there was still a number of Jewish-owned shops and businesses, particularly in the Cheetham Hill area where they lived. Shloimy grew up as a native Yiddish speaker, quite unusual, or very unusual at that time in Manchester for a boy of his age from a non-Hasidic family. And he'd accompany his mother on shopping trips. And as he said, there were so few children of his age who were speaking Yiddish. He was a huge attraction. When he went to the grocer's shop, the grocer would always put his hand in the barrel and pull out a cucumber for him. Shloimy became a child celebrity in many ways, and he was spoilt rotten by the shopkeepers because he spoke to them in Yiddish. He was raised in Yiddish. It was incredibly important for his parents, and this was the culture that he grew up in. Next slide, please. Shloimy's uncle Laser introduced his parents to the monthly Yiddish magazine Loshen Leben, Language and Life, which you can see here in the slide, which was edited and compiled by London's foremost Yiddish poet, in my opinion, another Polish emigre, Avram Nuchem Stenzel. His parents took out a monthly subscription and they look forward to the arrival of the magazine with tremendous pleasure, reading it, just like my own grandparents, from cover to cover as soon as it arrived. Moishe was soon writing articles in Yiddish on a regular basis for this magazine, and you can see his name there for the Yiddish speakers in this particular copy. After Moishe died in 1964, even when his mother had no money, she still kept up her subscription to the magazine. And one Saturday afternoon, she went to London and sang at the Saturday afternoon Friends of Yiddish literary meetings, which Stenzel had established in 1936 in Whitechapel, soon after his arrival from Berlin to London. Shloimy, like me, grew up hearing all these stories about this legendary Yiddish poet. And years after both his parents had died, before he emigrated to Israel in the late 1970s, he wrote the poet himself and asked if they could meet. Next slide, please. Much like the Manchester Jewish shopkeepers of his childhood, Stenzel was absolutely delighted to hear from someone from Shlomy's generation who was a fluent Yiddish speaker. And he invited the young youth worker from Manchester, who was in his early 20s then, to meet him in Whitechapel for a walk. This was in 1977. And the slide that you can see there is a selection of photographs that Shlomy took on that very first walk with Stenzel, including a portrait of the poet who was in his 70s then. So I'd like to play you a short recording now of Shloimy describing that walk with Stenzel, and you can hear, even after decades of living in Manchester, he's still living in Israel, that he still had a very strong Mancunian accent. Tori, please can you play the clip?
The first time that I met Stenzel, we very much hit it off, and the next thing I know, we're walking down Whitechapel Road. He is showing me things. He's showing me his Whitechapel. And we end up very quickly at Bevis Marks, which for him was the greatest symbol of Jewish, if you like, renewal to London, because it's where it all started. I would have thought he would have taken me to an Ashkenaz Bet Knesset, but he didn't. This was the most important thing he wanted me to see right from the beginning. And the second important thing was by Black Lion Yard, the picture of Tynes Street, where Shalom Aleichem was. After that, I probably met him another 4 or 5 times when I came for the Shabbat meetings of the Yiddish speaking circle. He made me very welcome and made a fuss of me, especially because he remembered my father. Visits, we ate out, we went to the luncheon club together.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Can we have the next slide, please? So you heard Shlomy describing his meeting with Stenzel there. He told me he cut a very impressive figure with his electric blue eyes and trilby hat, and always well dressed, but in quite a shabby suit. And a copy of Loschen Leben under his arm, which he was always trying to hawk on the streets because that's how he survived financially. So on that first walk, as Shlomy mentioned, they went to places like Black Lion Yard, which was once known as the Hatton Garden of the East End, because there were so many jewelry shops there, although most of the street and most of the shops had been demolished by then. Next slide, please. Shlomy said he had trouble keeping up with him because he was walking so quickly. And as they walked and talked in Yiddish, of course, he pointed out places on the way where, for example, the Jews' Free School had been in Bell Lane, the site of the Jewish soup kitchen, the site of a former Jewish newspaper, where this is one of the last remaining tangible traces of the Jewish East End left in the area today. That sign on Whitechapel Road where a Jewish newspaper used to be. He took him to the site, the last remnants of the Yiddish theatre, like the Grand Palais. And Shloimy remembered some of the actors who played there coming to Manchester and staying at his uncle's house. Next slide, please. Shloimy told me that he was amazed by the amount of Jewish institutions, shops, and people still speaking Yiddish, because everyone kept telling him that the Jewish East End was dead already, that it was over. This is 1977 and 1978. But for Shloimy, an outsider coming from Manchester, it was absolutely buzzing with life and activity. They passed some rundown tenement blocks. They stopped at the Whitechapel Library, which was known as the University of the Ghetto. They visited the Great Orrick Street Synagogue, and they visited the Kosher Luncheon Club, which was an amazing institution formerly run by Connie Shack in the same building as the Federation of Synagogue offices, where you got a really good meal, good kosher meal for a great price. And it had this very specific old world European style. And it was somewhere that was still operating when I visited a decade or so later to the area. And after their walk together, Shlomi would often go with Stenzel to Friends of Yiddish meeting. Next slide, please. So they visited places like Bloom's, that they didn't go in there because apparently Stenzel had been thrown out once from Bloom's for ordering no more than a cup of tea and a slice of toast. Next slide, please. They visited some of the synagogues that were still functioning in the area, and on Cheshire Street, Shlomi saw the work of Jewish cabinet makers working outside of their workshops. And one day, next slide, please, he managed to get inside the Cheshire Street synagogue. And he said it was the most remarkable find. It was Shabbat and the door was slightly open. So he went inside and saw this beautifully lathed woodwork done by the cabinet makers of the street. And he said because of the wood in the place, it had this really welcoming atmosphere. And there were about 10 men praying there, and they had the most magnificent kiddush after the service, which had been arranged for them by the Bangladeshi local caretaker because nobody lived nearby the shore. And there you can see the cabinets outside. Next slide, please. He took pictures of the Whitechapel waste, of the market stalls and the street life, of Stenzel selling his magazine near the London hospital, and the dark and ominous looking tenements which were pulled down soon after. And after his initial walk around Whitechapel with Stenzel, Shlomi started exploring the area himself before the Friends of Yiddish meetings on a Saturday, often drifting around the street, coming across things by accident. He told me that knowing that places like Commercial Road were important, I'd wander along and see a Jewish shop name and photograph it. And he spent days recording Jewish life, from shuls to delis, shops, market stalls and traders. Next slide, please. And here are some of the street scenes. Shlomi claimed that he wasn't a photographer, but I think there's something, as this particular slide shows, just really unique about his photographs, the composition, the particular colour and atmosphere of them. I think they're absolutely wonderful. Next slide, please. And they also absolutely capture that period. With little details like this slide of the very particular 1970s looking van that would transport elderly people backwards and forwards to the Jewish daycare centre. Next slide, please. He took slides of all the Jewish bakeries in the area, Cohen's, Kossoff's, Gradinski's, and the bagel shops operating in East London at the time. And he said, just like the shops he used to visit in Manchester as a child, all the people were very friendly. They loved me. They loved him coming in and chatting in Yiddish and taking a picture. And if we can just go through some of the next slide as well, please. He explored the back streets, he visited the little shops, the tobacconists, the market stalls, and the Jewish sellers. And his favourite and mine was Rog's. And there was Barry Barry Rogge, who'd always be in his old white vest, sticking his great hairy arms into barrels of cucumbers that he pickled himself. Next slide, please. And there you can see a picture of Barry's pickled cucumbers in the outside of the shop. And that, again, was still operating when I moved to the area in the early 1990s. And Barry's famous catchphrase was keep looking, he'd always say. Most of the time, Shloimy walked around the area alone. Please do keep going through the slides. But sometimes Stenzel would join him. And over time, they became really great friends. Shloimy described Stenzel as a Hasid of Whitechapel. The place was good to him, he said. It gave him a home. It gave him somewhere he could write in peace apart from during the Blitz. And he was always grateful for that. And his poetry expresses his love for the place. And I would argue that Shloimy's amazing photographs also express his love for the place. Next slide, please. Next slide. He recorded the kosher portraits in Hessel Street and told me there were shop after shop still operating at that time, stalls with chickens plucked and hanging from a barrow. They were all surviving, all doing business. He described the place, particularly Hessel Street, as a very rich Jewish landscape. Next slide, please. And here are some of the characters that he photographed there. Kosher slaughterers. And some places that weren't Jewish as such, but were very much part of that landscape. Next slide, please. And on Brick Lane itself, he photographed the Jewish booksellers, the newsagents, the textile and string merchants. And he was amazed that all these places still existed. Everything the community needed was still there. He said the community was large. It wasn't on its last legs. It was very vibrant during that time. Next slide, please. And here are some of the shop fronts, the kosher wine merchants. Next slide, please. The bakeries. Next slide. The textile and trimming merchants. Next slide. The furniture and cabinet makers who were still operating back then. And as he walked around the area, and he spent about 2 years doing this on Saturdays, not every Saturday, but as often as he could, always taking his camera, he fell in love with the area and documented it. And he told me that the reason that he wanted to take these incredible photographs is to be able to show his children growing up in Israel about Jewish life in England before, particularly in that part of London, before he emigrated. And because he was an outsider, he said he was very aware that it was a landscape that was about to vanish. And maybe because he'd witnessed that disappearance already in Manchester. So for that intense period of time, Shloimy photographed what he considered to be the important landmarks of Jewish London. Next slide, please. And some of his photographs, as far as I know, are the only images that exist of these places. The grocers, the bakers, the Judaica shops, the wine merchants, the butchers. And I'd like to end on this slide, which really is my favourite picture of these three gentlemen with trilby hats selling cloth. And Shloimy loved this image as well. And he said his father was a tailor And that's how he always described himself. His father sewed really beautifully, and and he remembers going to buy cloth with his father and watch the way he felt it and stretched it. And it was an art, a science, this buying of cloth and selling of cloth. There's just one final slide, one of my favorites. So Shloimy's photographs really capture the era absolutely, and they survive as a unique record of a disappeared world. In 1978, Shloimy, his wife Linda, and twins made Aliyah to Israel, and since December 1982, he lived in the collective village of Kfar Daniel. Sadly, Shloimy passed away in November 2020, just before his 70th birthday. I know he would be so proud to know that his work is being shown and shared at the Yiddish Book Center. Like his friend and mentor Stenzel, Shloimy was incredibly proud of his Yiddish roots and a true advocate for Yiddish language and life. I'd like to thank his widow, Linda Alman, for allowing me to share these images and Shloimy's story here, and also Harvey Rifkind, president of Sandys Row Synagogue, for first telling me about Shloimy and these extraordinary images. And many thanks to Lisa and all at their Yiddish Book Center for their interest and enthusiasm in Shloimy's work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. It's wonderful. Just walking through this with you, if I may, is just a treat. We are delighted to have the exhibit, thanks to your introducing us to the work at the center. I wanted to just jump in quickly. My introduction to you was through your work with Stencil, and I know you have an upcoming book that's forthcoming, The Prince of Whitechapel, a story of exile and survival, coming out through HarperCollins. Maybe you can speak a little bit about that, because as I say, that was the introduction I had to you and then ultimately to this work, and it's all so closely tied.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for asking about that. The book has been a very, very long time coming into being because, much like Shlomy, I first heard about Stenzel as a child because my grandparents were members of his Friends of Yiddish Literary Society, and they were also Yiddish speakers and Polish emigres who settled in Whitechapel before the Second World War. So I, just like Shlomy, I grew up hearing stories about this legendary poet, Avram Nuchem Stenzel, and have been trying for years to write a book about him. And during the many years I spent working in the former Jewish East End, everyone I spoke to spoke about Stenzel. They said, you can't talk about the Jewish East End and not speak about him. And then over a long period of time, I've been working with Yiddish translator to uncover the hidden stories about Stenzel's life in his memoirs. And once that started to happen, then the book really came into being. So I have been working on it for well over 20 years, and it will finally be published in March next year.
Um, it's exciting to see both the photographs, as I say, and to see the book coming out, and to have walked some of these streets with you back in March when I visited, which is a segue also into bringing Aviva onto this program, because I think coming from the States, it's been a real revelation to me. I mean, certainly we have our bibliographer and chief curator, David Mazower, who is London whatever native, working at the center, and all of these connections have been really wonderful, and we see that there's so much going on here. And if I may, Aviva, maybe speak a little bit, if you would, about Jewish Renaissance or Renaissance, as you say here, and I say in America. And then we can come back to some questions for both of you.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Lisa. And for those watching at home who aren't aware, Lisa is actually running this Zoom from London. And in return, I went to view the Shloimy photographs at the Yiddish Book Center in Massachusetts. So who knew I'd be going to Amherst to see photos for the first time of Whitechapel, which is not very far from where I live. We're really delighted to be part of this and to be building this relationship, because a lot of what you've seen of the old Yiddish East End and also the Yiddish press that I think is where we find out so much about history and culture has kind of formed inspiration from what we do in modern London. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Jewish Renaissance, because we are delighted to be building this relationship with the Yiddish Book Center. And in fact, both David Mazower and his daughter are writers of ours, and have done articles. But as you can even just see from our front covers, we're based in London. We focus a lot on British Jewish culture, but we're also now the leading European Jewish arts and culture publication. There are lots of political and news publications, but we really focus on arts and culture. And you can see our issue from spring, which was in celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Berlin Jewish Museum. And we've got Daniel Libeskind and his daughter on the cover. And they are between Berlin and Brooklyn. So we're also building lots and lots more transatlantic relationships. Our current issue has a cover that might not mean much to people in America, but means a lot to generations of people in the UK, and particularly people who lived in the East End. So in 1951, in terms of post-war recovery, London held, well, it then spread out all across Britain, but they held a massive cultural festival along the south bank of the Thames. And in fact, a lot of the artwork produced is now on the streets of the London East End, as well as in all sorts of places. One of the pavilions is, when it was taken down, was used as the building fabric for Edgware Synagogue. So this festival was very interesting, and it's the 75th anniversary currently. And the designer of all the material that promoted it was Jewish, Abram Games, born in Whitechapel, refugee, born in Whitechapel. You'll see many others in our kind of Festival of Britain who designed work. This is Abram, who designed kind of work for that 1951 festival, were indeed European Jewish refugees to London. And we were really delighted that in our Yiddishist section, we had Rachel do an article for us about the exhibition at the Yiddish Book Center, the photographs of Shloimy Alman, and what it means that in the 1970s, the East End was on the cusp of change. By the way, you'll see our Yiddishist page is right next to the beginning of our Sephardi Renaissance section. So we do cover the whole spectrum of Jewish identity and Jewish life. I just want to show you another page, and then I'll talk a little bit more about Whitechapel. But this is an issue from winter 2024. We, as well as doing contemporary cultural reviews and responses to things that are happening in the moment, you know, exhibitions, theatre, film. Someone put in the chat about Cable Street. We recently did a very big feature on a new musical about Cable Street. So we look very much at the now, but we also do dive into the past historically, and occasionally we have a long read. And I thought I'd just show you a long read which again bridges through Yiddish culture, America, and London, and specifically the life of Isaac Bashevis Singer. So I don't know how much people are aware, but actually Lisa's publications through White Goat Press have done a lot now to popularise the work of Isaac Bashevis Singer's sister, Esther Kreitman, who I shouldn't just describe his sister, phenomenal writer in her own right. And David Stromberg, a Yiddishist who has strong links to the centre, is on the board of the Isaac Bashevis Singer Trust, discovered a cache of letters that she wrote to her brother. And she wrote to him from London. She was part of the East End Jewish literary world. She wrote for the London Yiddish Press. She lived in Hackney, so not quite on the river, which is how we normally describe the East End, but still East London. And we were the first publishers of these letters that are now forming the basis of a book, I'm delighted to say. And we explored, you can see here, this is the salon of all the London Yiddish writers. And we explored that relationship across London, Warsaw, and New York of that Yiddish literary circle. So if people are interested, do kind of subscribe, not just to get our current issues, but to delve into our archive. We do events, and someone in the chat asked about, well, if I was coming to London, how would I explore? I've currently got just some of our walking tours up. So you can see we've got Hampstead in the 1930s, Jewish Stories in the Square Mile, the City of London is cheek by jowl with the East End. We're running Festival of Britain walking tours. But I'm also just going to give you sight of walking tours that aren't yet published that will be. Vivi Lax, who is the author of Whitechapel Noise, and she's amazing. She's a historian. She runs a podcast about the Yiddish East End. She sings. She's found all these East End songs. She's looked at what British Yiddish is as compared to all sorts of other Yiddish dialects. She's going to be running walking tours. We have them for our subscribers of Whitechapel and Stepney. We're going to look at the Bruigesses, and also the East End Yiddish Theatreland. But if you do come to London at other times, you can always get in touch with Jewish Renaissance and we'll link you to her to do some walking tours of the East End. So I hope that's just begun to give you a little bit of an idea. And I'm going to show you one more thing because the East End is coming back to life. So where do we end our East End Jewish walking tours? We end them at Rinkov's Bakery, which you saw in Shloimy Alman's photograph. And if I just scroll down the web page, what you'll see is that they are using those recipes and they have continued the life of that bakery from 100 years ago. Shloimy Alman was there in the 70s, but there it goes further back and it goes to the now. So you can see the family that is now running the bakery. So we try and look at those connections as well, the East End then and now. I'm going to stop talking and pass back to Lisa, but I hope that's given you a taste.
Thank you. I mean, again, it's so exciting to see the work that you're all doing here, and really uncovering things. And I'm going to bounce back, if I may, to you, Rachel, first with one quick question, which is, there is a catalog for this work. Can you tell our audience how they can get it by emailing or however to us?
Yes, there is a catalogue from the original exhibition at Sandys Row Synagogue, and Sandys Row Synagogue do have some catalogues. So if people are interested, is it okay if they email you and then I can give you all the details? It's quite a small catalogue, a small thin catalogue, about 100 pictures, but it is lovely.
It's got also a very good introduction by you, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you
And
very
as
much.
Aviva mentioned, there's a really nice piece in the current issue of Jewish Renaissance. So again, there are just all these threads connecting everything. But if you are out there wanting more information about any of this, email us at programs@yiddishbookcenter.org. Programs plural at yiddishbookcenter.org, and we will get back to you. So again, Rachel, you have these photographs. You've been doing all this work with stencil. You've also spent a good deal of time in that area and have been doing archival work and also preservation, etc. Speak a little bit about your connection there.
So my connection again goes back to my paternal Polish Jewish grandparents who met and married actually at English speaking classes. They met on the Whitechapel Road because they were both Yiddish speakers coming from Poland. And when I was growing up, they were just these very extraordinary characters, and they used to have their own kind of Yiddish salons around the house and invite their artists, friends, and writers and poets, and Stenzel may well have been there from the East End, and they'd be singing songs, and they told me about the Friends of Yiddish Society and the Yiddish Theatre, and I was just fascinated. So from a very young age, I wanted to move back there. And actually, in the early 1990s, I found out about the Princelet Street Synagogue, which is an abandoned 19th century shul owned by the Spitalfields Trust that was aiming to become a heritage centre. And I became the unpaid artist in residence. And then I was very lucky to be mentored by the late, great Professor Bill Fishman, who took me around the area, sharing his own lived experience of growing up in the Yiddish speaking East End. And he taught me to become a tour guide of the area. And even though I don't live there anymore, even though I did for many years, I've done so many different projects. It's just my ongoing passion through my books and artwork and films and digital projects and lots of various archive projects. I have a great passion to preserve and save that history of that area.
And interesting, Aviva, that you also in your work are doing things to engage people in that area through the magazine and through the tours that you do in London and elsewhere. So I'm going to ask you to speak a little bit about that, but I'm also going to ask you, because we have a lot of things coming in fast and furious here. First, the name of the book again is The Prince of Whitechapel, forthcoming in early 27 or sooner, Rachel.
In March 2027, if you go
Okay.
to the William Collins, who are the non-fiction wing of HarperCollins, I think you can pre-order copies, but it will be coming out in March 2027.
Great. And then I'm going to, and to subscribe to Jewish Renaissance, how do people do that?
So, well, I'm just going to respond because there might just have to be an article about Stenzel in the spring 2027
Wonderful.
issue of JR. So we will be talking about that. So you can just go online and find us at www.jewishrenaissance.org.uk. I'm going to show you the website. So our homepage is here, A Fresh Perspective on Jewish Culture. This is our latest issue. You can just subscribe through going to our magazine page, our column at the end, and going all the way down to subscribe, and you get the subscription page. I will say, though, that there's a form to fill in down here. If you wait till Lisa sends out the recording, so I believe the Yiddish Book Center will send out the recording in a little while to everyone, or in a follow-up in however many days' time, usually it's 10 days or so afterwards, we will be giving the Yiddish Book Center a discounted offer code for you all so that you'll all be able to get a little bit of money off, because we know nowadays that sending print magazines to America can be quite expensive. If you don't want to subscribe to print, I love print personally, but I know it can be hard. We have a digital subscription and we have a digital archive, and you can see, you can access, you just click on the issue online and then you get this kind of flick book, so you can read it as if it was, or you can read it in the way you read a normal web page. So there's lots and lots of way to read us. You don't have to subscribe, by the way, to come on any of our online programs, and we're hoping to do more in collaboration, or our tours. And who knows, there might just end up being some tours that happen of London for Americans, but currently we do international tours. I will just flag up that during our Paris tour that's coming up, I'm hoping that we're going to be doing a live from Paris event for the Yiddish Book Center. So you're going to find out about us in an ongoing way anyway, even if you don't subscribe. Though obviously we'd love you to become readers too.
And since we have a very international audience this time, somebody has made the point that Yiddish Book Center is spelled the American way, ER for center, not RE, so Yiddish Book Center, ER.org. Also, Rachel's article can be found in Pockenträger magazine, which is a members magazine. So join up with the Yiddish Book Center and you'll get an issue about Stenzel. So a few other quick questions before we have to sign off. Let's see. I think people are eager to find out if there's any thought to giving a walking tour based around Shloimy's photos and audio. And I guess the question would be, what would you still find of that neighborhood?
Well, that's a good question, and I can really answer it because I walk around that neighborhood very often. All the shops in Hessel Street are gone. The Grand Palais's gone. The Kosher Luncheon Club, Bloom's, all the Rogs was the last to go, Rogs Deli. They've all shut down. There are a couple of Jewish bakeries. Sandy's Row Synagogue is still operating. There's another couple of synagogues with small um, congregations, but there's very, very little left. If you were to walk around the Jewish East End today, it would be almost impossible to get that sense of the vibrant Yiddish speaking Jewish community that Shloimy described in the 1970s. And I must say, a lot of people then who maybe lived in the area didn't see it in the same way, but that maybe they weren't coming from Manchester. And sometimes when you have that outsider perspective, like he did, you see it in a different way. I first moved to the East End in the early 1990s, and there was still quite a lot of those places existing, but they have all gone. So there's never been a more important time to share stories. If people have living memories of the place, yes, maybe I'd like to highlight the memory map of the Jewish East End, which I developed with the Survey of London and University College London, and that kind of geolocates memories of vanished places in the area. So it's kind of 30 years of oral history interviews I conducted with people, a lot of whom are no longer with us, like Shloimy and Bill Fishman and others. And you can hear their stories, but I'm always looking for more stories about the Jewish East End.
Well, I think that's the lovely synergy between the two of you is that you're looking for stories, you're doing a lot of that research work, and it's being reported on, I think. Safe to say, yes, what's happening both past, present, in terms of the magazine. Quick question, who lives in the area now?
Well, it's very mixed. And when you say the East End, it's actually a really large area. If you're talking about what was called the kind of heart of the former Jewish East End, which predominantly Whitechapel, maybe parts of Spitalfields, it's a really mixed area. I mean, it was predominantly from the late 1970s onwards became a Bangladeshi area, a Pakistani kind of Muslim area, but now it's such an expensive place to live. Not all parts of that area, but certainly parts of Spitalfields. So it's become a really international area. It's no longer the first port of call for refugee and immigrant groups, which it was for over 250 years. You know, it's now a place certainly I can't afford to live in anymore, or most other descendants of people like my family or others who moved there. You know, my father was horrified when I moved back to Whitechapel in the 1990s, and now my kids couldn't afford to move there. So that's the story. It's an inner city story of regeneration and change.
And Aviva, are you surprised by what's still being discovered about this history?
I am, and actually the wider history of the area. So the East End, as Rachel says, she talked about Spitalfields and Whitechapel. on the other side of Spitalfields, you get this City of London area, which people might know for things like the Barbican. So there's a whole project going on about the Barbican at the moment because underneath where the Barbican was built was the medieval Jewish cemetery, where Jews throughout for about 300 years were buried until the expulsion, and the Jews from across the UK. And someone in the chat also asked about Stamford Hill, which is the religious neighborhood where you get a lot of Haredi Jews, predominantly Hasidic, living. That's kind of north of the East End in East London, in the area of Hackney. And one of the things that's very interesting to me is that all the citizens of the Barbican who are kind of mainstream, quite funky, professional architects and lawyers and musicians were thrilled to find the medieval history. And then realised that every year from Stamford Hill, there were people going on the art site of one of the medieval rabbis who was buried there, to say Kaddish. So the Hasidic community were keeping a memory all the way back to the medieval period. Nowadays in East London, you've got a lot of young Jews coming back and looking at that East and Yiddish identity as a way to find diaspora identity as well now. So we're seeing a new book centre and library project coming out. Lots and lots of artists are exploring work there, which is very exciting, I think.
Well, I'm going to end it here, but I want to thank you both for a really fun program, an interesting program, and what I think is a beginning of an introduction to many more conversations about what the history of London is, the Jewish history of London, the different neighborhoods, and through the lens of Shloimy Alman, sorry. We've been introduced to this, and I think it's piqued a lot of people's interest and some people sharing stories, etc. So I want to thank you both again, Rachel Lichtenstein, for bringing this exhibit to the Yiddish Book Center. We hope that many of you out there will come and visit in Amherst, Massachusetts. To learn more about our upcoming programs, visit yiddishbookcenter.org/events, both live and also virtual. And also, please check out jewishrenaissance.org for information about all that is going on with the magazine, with their tours, with international and great articles. So it's a very happy presentation in terms of bringing the two of you together, and I hope it's the beginning of much, much more. I want to thank our producer, Tori Bell, for all she does behind the scenes here to make this all happen. And of course, a big shout out to all of our members who are out there in the audience this evening. Your support makes programs like this possible. If you would like to learn more about becoming a member or becoming more involved in terms of supporting the center, yiddishbookcenter.org/donate, where you'll find more information. Again, our calendar of events can be found at yiddishbookcenter.org. So we hope you enjoy this, and please stay well, stay safe, and good evening from here in London, and look forward to seeing you both at the center or somewhere in between. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you.